Okay. Can I propose at the start of the meeting that Councillor Debs Absalom, the Vice Chair, takes the chair for this meeting, notwithstanding the presence of Councillor Ayoub, because Councillor Absalom has considerable experience now of operating the Teams system and the complexities of these online virtual meetings. And I'd like to propose that formally, Chair, or not Chair yet. I'd like to propose that and ask for a seconder.
I'd like to second that proposal by Councillor Page. It's Councillor Barnett-Ward.
Thank you, Councillor Page and Councillor Barnett-Ward. I shall now chair the meeting. My name is Councillor Debs Absalom and I am the Vice Chair of Traffic Management Subcommittee, and I will be acting as Chair for this meeting. I would like to welcome you to the Traffic Management Subcommittee, which is again being held as an online meeting. With social distancing still in place, councillors are meeting tonight on the video conferencing platform instead of meeting in person at the civic offices. The agenda papers have been published on the council's website and on modern.gov app. These papers have been considered by members. I will ask members individually at the end of the debate on the reports where a decision is required to state if they are for, against or wish to abstain from the recommendations before them at that stage. For voting on information items of this meeting, I will ask, are we content to proceed, and pause for 5 seconds. I will take silence to mean that all members are agreed. I will shortly ask members to introduce themselves for the benefit of the public and also to ensure that all are in attendance as expected and that they can hear and speak to the meeting. Could I remind members and officers to put their microphones on mute when you are not speaking? When called to speak, you should unmute your microphone and pause for about 3 seconds to allow for the slight delay in connection. You must also remember to put your cameras on before being called to speak, otherwise you will not be visible on the screen during your contribution. Could I ask that just prior to the roll call that all councillors put the cameras on so you are ready to appear on screen when you introduce yourselves. You can turn your camera off again once you have done your introductions. As ever, we are at the mercy of individuals' broadband services, and it is possible that loss of connection may happen. However, as long as we have 3 members still in the meeting, we will be quorate. I will now do a roll call of councillors. As I say your name, could you introduce yourselves to the meeting? Councillors, please state your name and any position you hold. Please speak slowly and clearly for the benefit of the record. I am Councillor Debs Absalom, Vice Chair of Traffic Management Subcommittee. I will now call on the other members of the subcommittee alphabetically. Please speak slowly and clearly. Councillor David Absalom.
Councillor David Absalom, Redlands Ward.
Councillor Ayoub.
Councillor Mohammed Ayoub for Abbey Ward and also Chair of Traffic Management Subcommittee.
Councillor Barnett-Ward.
Hi, I'm Adele Barnett-Ward. I am Caversham Ward Councillor and Lead Member for Neighbourhoods and Communities.
Councillor Carnell. Councillor Carnell.
I don't see him there, Chair.
Don't think he's there. OK. Councillor Devine.
Hi, Councillor Ricky Devine, Lib Dem member for Tilehurst.
Councillor Hacker.
Yep, Councillor Sarah Hacker, Councillor for Battle Ward.
Councillor Page.
Good evening, Councillor Tony Page, Abbey Ward Councillor, Lead Member for Planning, Transport and the Environment and Deputy Leader of the Council.
Councillor Stanford Beale.
Councillor Stanford Beale, Peppard Ward.
And Councillor Whittam.
Councillor Jamie Whittam, Redlands Ward.
Thank you, councillors. I would also like to introduce you to officers who are in attendance tonight. They will not be on the screen as much as the councillors, but it's right that I introduce them so that you will know who they are and what their role is. I start with Mr. Simon Beasley, is the councillor's Network and Parking Services Manager. Mr. James Penman is the council's Assistant Network Manager. And my right hand two are Richard Woodford is from the Committee Services section. He will be assisted by Jenny Hazel in the production of the meeting online. Jenny Hazel is also from the Committee Services section. She is able to advise on council procedures. She will also take the minutes of the meeting. Right, we'll start our agenda with declarations of interest. I have not been notified of any interest to be declared. I will pause for a moment to allow any councillors to state if they have an interest and to declare the nature of it. Right, I have not received any indications, therefore we will proceed to the next item. So, agenda item 2, minutes of previous meetings. Members, can you confirm that the minutes are correct record of the meeting held on the 16th of September 2020?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you, councillors. The minutes are approved. I will sign them in due course. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? No. No. Right. We will move on to questions from members of the public and from councillors. We have received one question from a member of the public and 2 questions from Councillor Whittam. We will take the public question followed by the questions from Councillor Whittam. Public question, Mr. Pegg, I welcome you to the meeting. Please can you press *6 to unmute yourself and ask your question when you're ready.
Hello,
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Pegg. If you
Okay, my name is Andy Pegg. I'm a resident of Eastern Avenue, which is in Park Ward and Redlands Ward, both sides of the road. My question was, I would like to ask the committee whether they support the residents of Eastern Avenue who are calling for a trial full closure of the entrance into Eastern Avenue at its junction with Woking Road. And for context, I added some context to this question. I first wrote to councillors Tony Page and David Absalom and Rob White, who's a Green Councillor of Park Ward, on the 4th of December 2017, voicing residents' concerns about the high volume of rat-running vehicles entering Eastern Avenue from Wokingham Road, and this is to avoid the lights and the congestion on London Road, particularly at peak times. And at that time, I expressed my concerns that any traffic reducing measures implemented in Crescent Road would, in all likelihood, significantly increase rat running in Eastern Avenue unless measures were taken at the same time to mitigate this. After learning of the Crescent Road School Street proposal, which has been much coverage in the press, in August of this year, I wrote again to councillors Page and Absalom. I was concerned that whilst extremely laudable, the School Street proposal would displace traffic at peak times, thus exacerbating the already existing problems of rat-running traffic in our road, Eastern Avenue. To address this issue, many of the residents have called upon our councillors to support a trial closure of the entrance to Eastern Avenue from Wokingham Road, which is at present a one-way plug. It would just mean completing the closure there. And this to coincide with the implementation of the School Street in Crescent Road. A recent survey carried out in the last few weeks by councillors Rob White and Josh Williams to assess the residents' support for this trial in Eastern Avenue had results that were overwhelmingly in favour of this proposal. 97% supported the trial of the full plug or were undecided but would like to see a trial, 97%. So finally, I request that this committee gives this proposal their full consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pegg. Can I call on Councillor Page, Lead Councillor for Strategic Environment, Planning and Transport, to respond on my behalf? Councillor Page, have we lost you?
If I unmuted myself, sorry, Chair, I'd already got the, bear with me, my apologies. I thought I was unmuted. Let me start again. I thank Mr. Pegg for his question. The council currently has no proposals to introduce traffic reducing measures on Crescent Road. The School Streets initiative is being explored by local schools, and consideration will need to be given to any potential impact on surrounding streets. It is important to note that the intention of the School Streets initiative is that any approved schemes would be managed by the school or schools and implemented for relatively short periods around school arrival and departure times only. Clearly, this would only take place when the schools are open, so would operate on a Monday to Friday basis and during term times only. The closure of any street needs to take into consideration the impact across the wider area and the possible displacement of traffic to other streets. Any full-time closure would obviously have a much greater and longer lasting impact than any short duration closure. We have yet to hear from the schools on Crescent Road following their recent informal consultations and whether or not they wish to proceed with a School Streets application. If there is a proposal from the schools, it would be considered by this subcommittee and, if supported in principle, would then be subject to formal statutory consultations with the local community. Any objections would then be brought back to this subcommittee for consideration prior to a final decision being made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Mr. Pegg, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Councillor Page, for the very full answer to my query. I'd like to ask just for some further clarification, please. I first wrote to you in 2017, way before the issue of a school street was ever mentioned. And so what I would like to ask is, regardless of the school street trial, I understand your answer to that, it's very full, but regardless of that, does the committee support the residents of Eastern Avenue who are calling for a trial full closure at the entrance into Eastern Avenue at its junction with Wokingham Road? So we would like, the residents would like that to be given full consideration in light of the fact that there's so much rat-run traffic, particularly before the lockdown and especially at peak times. So that's my further clarification question. Thank you.
Councillor Page?
We do not have a view on that particular and specific proposal. The priorities of the council and this subcommittee in the period since you wrote have been on delivering what the vast majority of local residents have expressed as the key priority in that area, namely a residents' parking scheme. And that has been successfully delivered. And obviously the implications of that residents' parking scheme are also still under evaluation because it's a relatively new scheme. Obviously, the issue of road closures and traffic movements needs to be considered in the context of the wider area. And as I have assured you, if there is an application for a school streets partial closure, then that will be considered along with the implications for the wider area. But the one thing that we have learned over many years, and I'm sure you will understand this, is that it is not advisable just to deal with an individual street on an ad hoc basis when the displacement implications can be quite severe, and that therefore requires an area-wide approach to these problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Page.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Mr. Pegg. I will now ask you to hang up and leave the meeting. You are, of course, welcome to continue watching through the online link on the councillor's website.
Many thank you.
Chair, before you just do that, sorry, it's Jenny here. Jenny, I've just had an email from a member of the public. The link doesn't appear to be working online, so we'll try and resolve that. So I don't know if Mr. Pegg actually wants to listen to the meeting, because he can do so this way unless there's any objections, but obviously when it gets to part 2 he can't. So Do you want to stay for the rest of the meeting, Mr. Pegg? Because it appears to be some problem with the link for you to access it by the normal way.
It's not obligatory.
Are you there, Mr. Pegg, or maybe he's left?
I think he's gone. Yes.
All right. Okay. Sorry about that. I just thought I should mention it.
Sorry, well, that's online for you, Jenny.
It might be. I don't know how you feel. This other member of the public, that if we can't get him to join, that I'll offer that facility to dial him into the meeting. But if that is, you can just carry on with the meeting. Is that okay?
Yes, I'll carry on now.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, we now move on to questions from Councillor Whittam. Councillor Whittam, would you like to ask your first question?
Thank you, Chair. My first question is about the cycle scheme underspend. Where there is an active travel tranche 1 cycle scheme underspend on the money obtained from the government recently, what happens to the underspend? In Redlands Road, for example, the scheme was estimated to cost 30,000, but only a very limited scheme was put in, costing 10,000. What is the total tranche 1 underspend or overspend so far, and what will happen to this money? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whittam. Councillor Page, would you like to respond on my behalf?
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me, Chair?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank Councillor Whittam for his question. As I answered in reply to your question to Council on the 20th of October, the £30,000 for Redlands Road was reported in an update to Traffic Management Subcommittee in July, along with figures for other proposed temporary schemes. This figure was an estimate based on the original bid to the Department for Transport for Tranche 1 emergency funding to introduce schemes supporting active travel and social distancing as part of the COVID pandemic. At this point, we did not know if we would be successful with our bid and did not have a concept scheme design. Like many other councils, we did not receive the total funding allocation, and officers have reassessed the original thinking, adjusting the proposals to fit the funding offered. Despite not receiving all of the funding, the council was still committed to delivering as best as possible all of the proposals. Consequently, the reduced funding was easier to achieve on some schemes than others. It's important to understand the context of these active travel schemes and that they are a response to COVID and intended to be temporary. The funding reflects that the situation will change and some of these temporary measures may be adjusted or removed as the impact of the pandemic evolves. At this time, the delivery of the Tranche 1 schemes is incomplete, so we do not have the total scheme costs yet. Officers have also reconsidered some aspects of the Redlands scheme, for example, proposing to move from virtual cushions to physical measures. You will note that there is a report later in today's agenda with these proposals. The costs of any implemented scheme, including these active travel schemes, are the hold costs, including design, procurement and delivery, and not just the physical measures on street. The cost of these measures in Redlands Road to date will be nowhere near the original estimate. However, the overall package of measures delivered across Reading is expected to be to the grant value that we received. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Councillor Whittam, do you have a supplementary question?
No, thank you for the answer.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Whittam. Now, would you like to move on to your second question, Councillor Whittam?
Thank you, Chair. Residents often complain about the inflexibility of visitors' permit system. A while ago, electronic visitors' permits were mentioned by the council as something that could be progressed. A resident would have an allocation of visitor hours per year and could spend them using the online system in small chunks, rather than the case at the moment, where sometimes the resident will use a whole permit for a 1 hour visit. Can I get an update on the progress towards implementing electronic visitors permits? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whittam. Councillor Page, would you respond on my behalf?
Yes, Chair. I thank Councillor Whittam for his question. As a member of the Traffic Management Subcommittee, you will be aware that there have been regular reviews of the residents' parking scheme and discussions of ideas for potential improvements that officers have brought to us. The Council is fully committed to delivering further improvements to the resident permit parking scheme. Officers are working through different options, including the example mentioned in your question, and how these can link with the Council's wider customer improvement strategies. It is important at this time that we ensure that this work is developed in a holistic way as part of these corporate strategies and does not become a standalone initiative. Reports will be brought to this subcommittee as the work progresses. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Councillor Whittam, do you have a supplementary question?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Right, now we move on to agenda item 4A, which is a petition. We have received a petition from Traffic Calming Planter on Hamilton Road. You have, we've got the petition, but you've also all had a letter from Mr. Brian Oatway in response to this petition. Now we're here today to accept the petition. Is everybody happy with the recommended actions? And then we will discuss it when it comes back to us with the officers' reports.
Agreed.
Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
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 Thank you. Right, we'll move on to agenda item 5, results of statutory consultation, SIL locally funded schemes. Right, if I turn to page 4.4, I'll go through the list of schemes. Now, the first scheme is Tiger Crossing on Gosbrook Road, and I know Councillor Adele Barnett-Ward would like to speak.
Chair, just before you called, do we not have an officer introduction, just in case there's any updates?
Is Mr. Penman around for this one? James Penman?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Would you like to introduce the reports? Sorry, that was my mistake.
No, thank you, Chair. So over the autumn, there's been a significant amount of activity taking place across the range of schemes that are funded from the local SIL contributions. So as a summary of what we've delivered so far, we've delivered quite a wide reaching signing improvements to help signpost HGVs. This was in relation to many that were ending up in Elgar Road, which was very, very problematic. We've also recently installed a new 20-mile-an-hour zone in Brunswick Street and Western Road, which immediately followed resurfacing works. And just this week, resurfacing has taken place on Grovelands Road across the double mini roundabouts, and new lining strategy implemented. So we've conducted a number of statutory consultations to support these and the other schemes, and I'm pleased to report that the majority of those schemes received no objections. So we're now working on developing the delivery programmes, and we'll be in contact with ward councillors very shortly. We're hoping to start some of these schemes by the end of this month. But we have, however, received objections for some elements of two proposed schemes, which, as you've mentioned, Chair, was the Tiger Crossing on Gosbrook Road. These mainly focused around the necessary reduction in parking spaces that would be needed, and also on the 20-mile-an-hour extension for Northumberland Avenue. So with Northumberland Avenue, we have included in the papers as well a potential modified design which members can consider. We've had it confirmed that if that was a proposal that wanted to take forward, we wouldn't need to reconsult. So we're just asking members tonight for these two schemes where we have received objections, whether how we wish to proceed with those schemes now.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. Right, I think we'll take the schemes one by one, and we will start with the Tiger Crossing on Gosbrook Road. Councillor Barnett-Ward.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I've looked at this with interest because this is a scheme that's very popular among residents in Caversham, and as James has pointed out, the objections mostly speak about the reduction of parking spaces. There were some people commenting on the number of crossings and the effect on road traffic of the number of crossings. But with that one, I think if we're serious about prioritising walking, cycling, other sustainable modes of transport over cars, then that is going to mean putting in pedestrian and cycle infrastructure, and that may cause some slight inconvenience to people in cars, in this case having to an extra point where they need to stop. And I think the greater good is the principle here, and the same with the parking. There are other opportunities to park right by Christchurch Meadows, particularly off Wolsey Road. There's 2-hour bays there. There's also 3 car parks in the centre of Caversham. So given the benefit to a limited number of people parking for 2 hours at a time compared to the number of people who need to cross between Christchurch Meadows and Westfield Road, and members will also see the number of comments that weren't included as comments of support because they were about the junction rather than about the parking. But I think that demonstrates the support for this crossing within Caversham. So I commend it to the committee, and I hope that people will approve it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett-Ward. Now we'll move to the next item, which is the zebra crossing for access to the Ridgeway School. I don't see anybody wishing to comment on that one. Then we move to the extension of the 20-mile-an-hour zone past Reading Girls' School. You will have seen an email that you were sent from committee with the results because it hadn't closed when the report went to print. So anybody got any comments there?
Chair, can I propose we accept James Penman as referred in his email, supplementary email, to the modified proposal, which overcomes some of the objections received, and he's confirmed that we wouldn't need to reconsult if we accept these minor modifications. So I would propose that we accept the modified proposal, which I think will enhance the safety and effectiveness of the 20 mph scheme in that area.
Absolutely fine. Does anybody want to comment on the Northumberland Avenue proposal? I've got Councillor Whittam wishing to speak on that. We've all had the plan sent to us. Councillor Whittam.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I certainly support this. I was just wondering, with the speed cushions now rather than the raised table, which was to tout the buses, I think there's a sort of more general problem with speed cushions, and people with the sort of ever more popular SUVs with a wider track than most cars can just drive over these at full speed. It sort of creates a two-tier system where people with expensive cars can speed. I'm not really sure what the solution is, but I just thought I'd mention that. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Penman, did you wish to respond to Councillor Whittam?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you raised a good point, Councillor Whittam. Yes, the table that we'd originally proposed, there are a lot of constraints in that area with a lot of drop curves and so on. So we're looking at where we could potentially put a raised table and provide an uncontrolled informal crossing point as well. We do absolutely understand the concerns that have been raised by the bus company, and unfortunately there is no way that we could modify that table to increase its length. Therefore, cushions are the only other alternative that we have to provide traffic calming. Typically, that's what we would try to provide on bus routes anyway. We're very well aware of the challenges that they face.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. Now, the next point is enforcement of 20 miles an hour in Redlands, but that is in the next report. So I think we can discuss that then. Then we move on to signs for HGVs, Elgar Road South. No indications. Then I have had from Councillor Terry on the 20 mile an hour zone on Brunswick Street and Western Road. They've been well received, and she's had some excellent comments back from residents. This also applies to reduce speed on Southcote Road and Westcote Road. That's been received well too. Councillor Carnell, nice to see you've sorted your system and you've joined us. Right, the improvements to the double roundabout signing Grovelands Road. We've had very good response from residents there. I had to commend the contractor to do the work. They did it late into the night. They had the rain to contend with. Thames Water have also provided some more water with a nice leak in the middle of their work. So they're coming back again tonight to do this in the dark. And so, yes, that scheme has gone very well. And the last scheme is the pedestrian crossing Oxford Road and Overdown Road. Right, got no indications there. So I've got no more indications from anyone. So I will now put officers' recommendations to the vote. They can be found at page 15 and 16. Firstly, are councillors in agreement to note the report as per recommendation 2.1? Then
Agreed.
Agreed. Yep, lovely, that's enough. Secondly, we expect of 2.2 regarding Appendix 1. Do we agree to either implement, amend or reject the proposals?
Well, we've been through those, Chair. I think we're supporting all of those along with the modified proposals for Northumberland Avenue.
That's true. So that's all fine with that point. Thirdly, are councillors in agreement to recommendation 2.3?
Agreed.
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 Yeah. Agreed. Fourthly, are councillors in agreement with recommendation 2.4?
Agreed.
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 Thank you. That's lovely. Now we'll move on. Right, agenda item 6. Still locally funded schemes, the Redlands 20 mile an hour enhancements. Mr. Penman, are you ready to introduce this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So we implemented this wide area 20 mile an hour zone a number of years ago, and it's had a really positive impact on vehicle speeds. But it's unfortunate, however, as has been reported through this meeting, that some motorists are continuing to drive in excess of that speed limit. So allocation of local SIL funding in Redlands area has enabled us to revisit and review the area. So we're proposing in this report a range of measures that are intended to provide improvements in the compliance of motorists to the 20 mile an hour speed limits. It's important to note that these measures are intended to be effective at all times. So we're asking members this evening to agree that the scheme design overall and to officers conducting statutory consultations that are necessary for certain elements of the scheme. So these are namely speed humps, speed cushions, and where we have some priority flow features that are being proposed in Redlands Road. I understand we may have a few slides where I can give a brief overview of the measures that we're proposing. Thank you very much. So in Allcroft Road, we're proposing some full width speed humps, which are the most effective form of speed reduction. Thank you. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. My apologies that these plans don't necessarily translate very well on a presentation, but Kendrick Road has been one of the challenging streets for us, being a very straight, well-sited long road. So we've got a number of different measures that we're proposing here. So we've got a range of cushions, bearing in mind again that this is a scheduled bus route. But we're also proposing, and again, it doesn't show very well in this scale. We're proposing a number of small build-outs at the beginning of some of the parking bays as you approach them. So we've got a range of parking bays. We added some additional parking on street to just break up the road a bit, so that you weren't able to drive straight through it and try and reduce the vehicle speeds that way. We appreciate that certainly at the moment, with the situation we find ourselves in, that there isn't always as high level of parking as had been intended. All these build outs are designed to do, for the very minimal intrusion into those parking bays, is to just build out from the curb a bit and provide some obstacles, for lack of a better word, for vehicles to bring out and slow those down. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And that continues for the length of Kendrick Road. Another measure that I'd just like to point out on the plan towards the bottom left, we've proposed a small island in the junction with Allcroft Road, and the reason for this, it's a very wide bell mouth, and it was very obvious to us on site that the cars were essentially barely having to slow down to turn around and cut that corner. So we felt that in putting a small island there, it would mean that they'd have a tighter turning radius, and that in turn would slow down approaching vehicles making that turn, and also remove some of the risks around those movements. Thank you, Matt. The next slide, please. So again, referring back to those small build-outs, this is an example of what that could look like. So a relatively small reflective bollard, and this is actually proposing to reuse some of the segregation measures that were deployed on Gosbrook Road as part of the active travel scheme. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So in a similar way to Allcroft Road, Morgan Road here, again, we're proposing full width speed humps. Thank you. And may I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And finally, on Redlands Road, we've got quite a combination of measures here. So we've got cushions again. We've also got a small pinch point, but we've also got two priority flow measures. So these are giving way to oncoming traffic. We've got two sets of those in opposing directions. Again, the idea being to just try to break that flow down, get people looking ahead and to reduce their speeds. Thank you very much. I think that's the last slide, Chair.
Yes, that's the last one I've got. Thank you, Mr. Penman. Councillor David Absalom's the first to indicate to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Penman, for that presentation. I mean, tonight is not the night to nitpick the details of the plans. We are being asked to support or recommend or agree to the officer's report of going to consultation, and it's through that process that we can then start to take it apart, maybe make changes, etc., and pretty much discuss it, I suppose, back in January, I believe, when it comes back then. It's obviously already stimulated a lot of interest. Several residents have jumped the gun and sent in emails and letters and etc., and I've had a few. I'd just like to take a few moments just to remind people how we got here and why we're here with this presentation from James. Some years ago, now, seems like even longer. Redlands councillors worked with officers to introduce what was a successful area-wide parking scheme, and what's basically referred to is Old Redlands. That actually was very successful, flushed out a lot of the sort of parking, the day trippers, etc. But the unfortunate or unexpected consequence of that success was cars started driving faster around the roads of Redlands because there were less, there was less parking, so the roads were clearer. We then brought in a few years ago, as Mr. Penman mentioned, we brought in a 20-mile-an-hour zone. And over the whole, it has helped in reducing speeds of drivers. Unfortunately, there's always going to be an element who won't abide by the rules or the law. And so we're having to look at alternative ways to bring in enhancement of the 20-mile-an-hour system. We've already put in extra signs, we've added more discs painted on the road with 20 miles an hour on it. We've not as yet, as a council authority, been successful. I think that's going to get discussed later about policing the roads. We haven't got the authority to enforce it currently, and it may take some time before we get up, if we ever do. So we have to look at alternative ways of enhancing the 20-mile-an-hour zone. I think what we've got here is a very interesting set of plans. I'd like to congratulate the officers for the amount of time they put into it. I know my colleague, Councillor Tony Jones, has also had a fair bit of input and discussion on various aspects to it. And I look forward to the consultation and what comes out of that. And as I said, tonight's not the night to nitpick. Tonight is the night that we just accept this, move forward with it, and see what the residents agree or don't agree with. Because after all, we've never done anything in Redlands, or we, the Labour Council and Labour councillors, have never done anything in Redlands that didn't have resident consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor is next. Councillor Whittam?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, yeah.
It's just saying bad network then. So yes, I'll certainly be supporting the recommended actions on this, and it's good to see it coming forwards. And so yeah, without trying to nitpick it before the consultation, I have had quite a few emails in from residents. So I'll just briefly summarise that the sort of main thing people were looking for was they wanted enforcement. So it's good to see that's coming later on the agenda today. Then the next thing, people weren't keen on the speed tables and cushions. They were citing increases in particulate matter and emissions due to the sort of deceleration and acceleration, as well as some people having issues with vibrations in their properties. The other issue that people were concerned about was cyclists being able to get through the build outs without having to go into the middle of the road. So yeah, I'm certainly for the scheme. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Whittam, yes, we have had several comments before we've even gone to statutory consultation where we can have replies from residents that will all be counted. So it's when we bring this report back that we can discuss the comments that we've had from residents. Councillor Page.
Yes, I very much welcome this report and thank the officers and relevant members for the effort that they've put into this. It's quite clear that simply painting 20 mph on a road or having a sign displayed does not deliver the necessary compliance. There are far too many car drivers and lorry drivers and occasionally even bus drivers who choose to ignore those limits, and there's therefore a need for physical measures as well to try and secure compliance. And the range of measures that we have got here is a good cross-section of what can be deployed on the highway, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee full compliance with 20 mph by any means. And the issue of speed enforcement generally that Councillor Whittam referred to and others is one that we as an authority will need to continue to press. But just before I say anything further on that, can I just make it clear that I think the intention of all of us is to see a consultation on all these proposals. Now, technically, only certain elements, such as the speed humps and cushions, require statutory consultation. And I've only just, and I should have picked this up earlier, so my apologies, Chair. Recommendation 2.3 asks us to undertake statutory advertisement processes for the applicable traffic calming features. Now, that would mean that we would only be consulting on certain elements of this. And that certainly isn't the spirit of the sorts of consultations that Councillor David Absalom rightly referred to. So I would ask when James Penman comes back, just for his confirmation that I would want to delete applicable from this. We obviously have to consult on the statutory elements, but we also want to get people's feedback on the totality of the proposals. And so it would be silly for us to only consult formally on certain bits and say, oh, we don't need to consult on the rest, or have a separate consultation. That's silly. That would be silly, and people would be confused and rightly critical. So, Chair, my proposal is, and I think everybody would agree with this, is that we are wanting to consult on the full package of measures, whilst recognising that only some require a statutory process. But either way, we will be wanting to hear comments from public. Some of them already jumped the gun, which shows the degree of keenness and interest in the area. And there may be modifications that we may want to make in January when this comes back to the subcommittee in respect of those elements of the scheme that don't require the statutory consultation, but we still want to hear from people. So I just want to get clarification and confirmation that we can advertise the whole list. If the legal legal document needs to say, well, there are elements that don't require statutory consultation, but we're still consulting, so be it. But the fact is, we want comments on this whole package. And this package includes measures that we haven't trialled in Reading to date. There are some well-tested elements like speed humps and cushions, but some of the build-outs are not features that we have used. Reverse flow, I think the only part of the borough that has that is up in Caversham Park Village, but I stand to be corrected. And in terms of the better signage and other elements of this is something that we would be looking to apply in other parts of the borough, subject to funding. And funding is, of course, important here. There's a £100,000 budget that local members have decided to prioritise from the local SIL element. Colleagues need to remember that this is one of the benefits of local SIL funding, that we are able as members to indicate priorities, and this is the priority that Redlands members have identified for this area. So, Chair, I commend this package for consultation. I note that we've already had comments from the public. Some of them are some of them go in different areas, but I think they are all welcoming the fact that we recognise more needs to be done to enforce safety and reduce speeding in this area. I'll say a bit more about general speeding on the next item, Chair, but if we could just get some confirmation and clarification from James around recommendation 2.3, because I'm concerned, and I would suggest, Chair, that it might be appropriate to knock out applicable from the wording of 2.3, and I apologise to officers, and also one of the VATs at the beginning of 2.3, but I apologise to officers for not having raised that earlier, and to yourself as well. But I think it's important that we advertise on the whole package and not just on the statutory element. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Page. I would certainly agree with you. Mr. Penman, would you like to sum up, have any comments on the report, and can we also remove the applicable and the double that from 2.3?
Thank you, Chair. Absolutely, no problem at all. While we may be limited on what we can put in the legal advert, we'll make it absolutely clear that we are welcoming feedback on the whole scheme in any media that we send out, and certainly where the consultation's hosted on our website, we'll make it very clear that we will welcome and report all the feedback that we receive across the whole scheme.
Thank you, Mr. Penman. I have received no further indications to speak from councillors. I will now put the officers' recommendations to the vote. It's from 2.1 to 2.7 with the alterations on 2.3, removing applicable and the double that. So could I have responses? Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
I think we're all agreed. That's wonderful. Right, we'll move on to agenda item 7, on-street pay and display, Oxford Road and Wokingham Road local centre tariffs. Mr. Beasley, are you here to introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am. Yeah. Just to say that this is a fairly straightforward report. So those of us that use the Oxford Road that know that area would have seen pay and display machines go in a little while ago now. The scheme to complete this process and bring those into operational has been stalled by the impact of COVID, and we need to set the tariff as well. So this report brings forward the tariff proposal for this area. There's some good points to this report in that at the moment in most of the Oxford Road and the Wokingham Road local centre, parking is only limited to half an hour. And so what this report does is open up parking to allow longer term parking if that's what people want. But obviously that will come at a fee, hence the payment machine. So what we're offering is in most part along the Oxford Road, we retain half an hour free parking, but then parking charges up to a maximum of 2 hours thereafter. That's the same as in the Wokingham Road local centre. On the Oxford Road, as you just leave the town centre, as you creep down towards Russell Street, because of the closeness to the town centre, this proposal adopts the town centre tariff, but it does reduce the first half an hour a little bit when compared to the town centre. Again, just to sort of encourage and promote the local economy in that area. So what you're being asked for this evening, Chair, you and the members, is to allow us as officers to carry out the statutory process that we need to advertise this tariff so it can then be implemented.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Councillor Hacker first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And also thank you, Mr. Beasley, for bringing this back. You may recall that when the charges were first brought to us, I raised concerns that we'd be losing that 30 minutes free parking, which is really useful for the shops on the Oxford Road where people just want to pop in. But obviously there have been problems in the past where it wasn't, enforced as quickly as it could be and the spaces weren't available. So it's brilliant to see this come back. The 30 minutes free is still there, so nothing has changed in that regard. But now people have got the option to stay longer if they wish, which I'm sure will be helpful to some of the maybe hairdressing businesses and restaurants along the Oxford Road as well. Obviously, I live off the Oxford Road, and so I drive up and down it regularly. And sometimes on the way back from somewhere, I might want to pop into one of the shops. Previously, I've not been able to because all the bays have been used. But with this 30 minutes free being enforced via a parking system will mean that it's easier to enforce, and so the chances of there being spaces improves. So hopefully businesses will see more people stopping on their way home or on their way to somewhere else, just to nip into one of the brilliant shops that we've got on the Oxford Road, maybe pick up a takeaway, pop into a pharmacy or get something from one of the many shops that we have selling all sorts of exotic foods from around the world. So it's great. I mean, also the small car park out the front of the big Tesco on the Oxford Road has also moved to a similar system because it also recognised that people weren't churning over. So there wasn't that movement of people coming into the spaces, shopping and then going home or going to work, wherever they were going. People were stopping people who wanted to pop in from doing so. So I can only see this as a beneficial thing to the area. We'll see how it goes. Obviously, if there are problems, we'll come back. But I hope it will mean that the shops get more people just dropping in, using them, because the Oxford Road is a thriving local neighbourhood shopping centre anyway. So I'm really pleased that our concerns were listened to, and we've had these new amended tariffs come forward with that 30 minutes free. So thank you to all who listened to us.
Thank you, Councillor Hackett. Councillor Whittam. Next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I particularly the Woking Road part I was thinking about, but I very much support this. I think it will really help with the enforcement of people overstaying, which in turn will help with the perpetual issue of double parking on Woking Road, which has been going on forever. And the initial free period will be great as well, so that the shops won't lose any business because of this. Can I ask if it's likely to go live before Christmas? Thank you.
Mr. Beasley, can you answer that question?
No, it's not likely to go live before Christmas. We've obviously got to get the notice out to press. There's a statutory 21-day period. You know, even with a fair wind, that would bring us right on top of Christmas now anyway. So I wouldn't expect this to be implemented before Christmas, but we look to do it as soon as we can after.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Councillor Devine.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Certainly welcome this proposal and the retention of the 30-minute free parking, because that's been an absolute boon in Tilehurst, and I'm sure it will be along the Oxford Road as well. It's something that people really benefit from. I think my real problem with this item though is enforcement, because it's all very well having yellow lines and parking meters, but we also need to be able to enforce it, and what I gather is our enforcement teams are working almost to the limit. And if this is new measures coming in here, are there any plans to extend enforcement in the area as well, both in the Oxford Road and the Wokingham Road?
Mr. Beasley, have you got any comments to make to Councillor Devine?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a really important point, because, you know, these things are only effective if you have effective enforcement as well. I mean, you know, any parking, the difficulty that we have with the free parking in the way that it's been presented at the moment is that there has to that parking has to be observed. So, you know, it may only be 30 minutes at the moment, but if that vehicle that's parked there hasn't been seen to be parked there, you know, until it's, you know, 15 minutes into that 30 minutes, then there's no way of knowing, you know, if it then outstays its 30 minutes. We're only going to know that if we then go back half an hour later and it's still there, if that makes sense. So you could end up in a situation, and we do know that it does happen actually in both these areas, in the Oxford Road and the Wokingham Road, that people stay well outside of that free or that 30-minute period. With this scheme, that can't be escaped, because even the free period will require the vehicle, the driver, to take a ticket and then display that ticket. And so you've got a very definite start time and then end time. And if anybody, as the report says, if anybody wants to stay longer than 30 minutes, they can do so, but they will have to pay. And that makes enforcement a whole lot easier, because clearly the civil enforcement officer doesn't have to be there precisely at the moment that the vehicle is parked, because the ticket is taken. If the vehicle is then observed without displaying anything, or we do have Ringo as well, which is a cashless payment option, and that will apply to the Oxford Road. But that information from Ringo is linked to the civil enforcement officer's handheld device as well. So any vehicle that they see parked there, they'll be able to check either by a ticket being displayed or whether or not a Ringo payment has been made. And if it hasn't, if those two factors aren't applied to any vehicle, it's an instant ticket. There is no other observation period needed. It is just an instant issue. So the whole thing makes enforcement a whole lot more efficient as well. You know, the businesses, as the report goes on to explain, should benefit from that. More people visiting the area, more people that want to engage with the local economy. So it's got to benefit everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. Right, I've received no further indications to speak from councillors, so I will now put the recommendations to the vote. Do we agree on recommendation action 2.1 and 2.2 of the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
That's unanimous. Wonderful. Right. Now we move on to agenda item 8. I personally like this one. Mr. Beasley, would you like to introduce the report Department for Transport Roads Policing Review?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, when you go back to 2010, when there was a change of government, everything that led up to that time, the previous government had very clear road safety targets and a strategy around enforcement as well. We, as a local authority, local highway authority, were joined at the hip with the police at the time. We had speed partnership arrangements. So within Thames Valley Police Force area, all the highway authorities came together and discussed all issues related to road safety and speeding, and we worked together as a team, as a unit, and that was really effective in driving down casualties. Since 2010 and the change in government, a lot of those policies were changed, which happens obviously when you have a change of government. That's fair enough, but nothing ever replaced them. So we had no road safety targets, we had no strategy around local highway authorities and the police working together. And I think that time has now told that wasn't necessarily the right strategy. And what this invitation by the Department of Transport and others within central government, it raised the issue that, hang on, we achieved an awful lot towards road safety up to 2010, but since 2010 there hasn't been any further improvement, and in fact not necessarily fatalities but serious injuries has slowly begun to creep up again. So this was a great opportunity for us as the Highway Authority to respond to this invitation to come up with our thoughts and ideas how we could be involved in better management of road safety, and particularly around speed enforcement within Reading. So, you know, hopefully, I know that you would have done as members, had the opportunity to read through this. There's some really interesting stuff in here. There's some really interesting points. I noticed that Councillor David Absalom made reference to this in his earlier comments around Redlands. You know, if Reading Borough Council were in a position to work alongside the police or take a lead in certain enforcement activities, I'm sure that we would be able to protect our residents and those people that use our local streets better than we're able to at the moment. And this response to that questionnaire back to the department invited us to do. So yeah, I'm really pleased with this report, and my thanks again to those members, particularly Councillor Page, that I worked with very closely on this reply, because I think it's a really, really good reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. I have to totally agree with you, and I hope they do take note of your answers to the questions. Councillor Page.
Yes, Chair, and I thank Simon Beasley for his introductory comments. You may be, some of us are old enough to remember that over 20 years ago, the police were responsible for parking enforcement, and they saw that increasingly as a burden and a low priority, and pressure built up, and local authorities were able to take over parking enforcement, and Reading did that early on, and it's now something like 20 years that Reading has been enforcing parking restrictions in the town, and I think the result of that has been a stepwise improvement in the level of enforcement. It's not perfect, but it's considerably more than would have been the case had the police continued with that responsibility, because self-evidently in the police ranking of priorities, parking enforcement would come low, set against all the other major challenges that society and policing faces. And unfortunately, speed enforcement is now in the same category. the police, Thames Valley Police, have made it quite clear that they do not enforce and will not enforce 20 mph and expect those zones to be, quotes, self-enforcing. Hence the measures that we have brought forward in Redlands and may well bring forward elsewhere in the town. But again, those will not deliver a total speed compliance, and particularly on roads like Kendrick Road and longer roads that in the borough, the IDR, since the lockdown, particularly with less traffic, complaints of speeding have risen considerably. Examples anecdotally across the borough from all colleagues about increased speeding, not only by car drivers but also by motorcyclists in particular, presents a real hazard to safety in the borough. And we as a local authority have a right to expect better levels of enforcement. Now, the police can't deliver that, but the local council could if given the right powers. And the powers that we're looking for, not necessarily to take over all police enforcement powers, speed enforcement powers, but certainly to be allowed up to, say, a certain level of enforcing 40 mph. But we should be allowed to deploy speed cameras, whether through average speed enforcement or through the traditional speed cameras, but on the basis that the proceeds of the fines are ring-fenced to the maintenance and enforcement of those cameras, and in the same way that bus lane and parking fines have to be ring-fenced towards traffic enforcement or wider environmental and traffic benefits, so too would the proceeds of speeding fines. But it is essential in the future that if we are going to be introducing more 20 mph zones in the borough, and we as an authority support that where there is the demand from the local residential communities, and we know that there is that pressure, but they will also rightly expect enforcement. And it's no good for us to say, not our responsibility, Gov, talk to the police, when the police self-evidently will not enforce and have a policy that relegates speed enforcement priority way to the bottom. And so the call in the final paragraph on page 73 of our papers is not only on the Department for Transport and the Home Office to facilitate any necessary legal changes, but also on Thames Valley Police and the Police and Crime Commissioner to recognise that as they give this a low enforcement, they should work with us, a low priority for enforcement, they should work with us to enable us to invest the capital costs, if necessary, in additional cameras and enforcement measures, but the quid pro quo is that we are then allowed to receive the proceeds of crime, namely the speed fines, to maintain and fund that additional enforcement. It's a quite common sense approach. It works for parking and it could work for speeding enforcement in the borough. It's the missing power, it's the missing tool or missing element in our armoury, and I hope that there will be unanimous support for that, and we will continue to lobby the police, the PCC and national government to deliver what is self-evidently in the interests of Reading. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Page. Councillor David Absalom.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted also to welcome this report. I mean, it's very interesting reading. Going back to the earlier items, you know, if we could work with the police in enforcing speeding in Reading, it would make life so much easier, and we probably wouldn't have to plaster our town with signs, paint markings and so on and so forth quite as much as we might have to if we can't get hold of the enforcement or to work alongside Thames Valley Police. I understand to some degree the Thames Valley Police position when you consider since the Conservative government came into power, They've had massive funding cuts. There's 20,000 less officers now than there was when there was a Labour government. But I hope this report is read and taken seriously by the government, and I look forward to its results. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Absalom. Mr Beasley, would you like to add any further comments, or should I take it to the councillors?
No, thank you, Chair. No, I'm just really pleased that you know, it has been well received.
Thank you. I would like to know if you could just say a yes or no if you are happy with the responses that we sent back to the DFT about their questions.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Good. Thank you. Right, now I just have to ask you to note this report. Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the public part of the meeting. I now need to move to the following motion. That pursuant to section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, members of the press and the public be excluded during consideration of the following item on the agenda, as it is likely that there will be disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1 and 2 of part 1 of the schedule 12A of that act. Can I ask the members of the press and the public to leave the meeting? Thank you.